and media availability. With us today on the House side are House Republican Leader J.T. Wilcox of the 2nd Legislative District and House Republican Assistant Floor Leader Chris Corey of the 14th Legislative District. And on the Senate side, we have Senate Republican Leader John Braun of the 20th Legislative District and Senate Republican Caucus Chair Judy Warnick of the 13th Legislative District. With that, I'll turn it over to House Republican Leader Wilcox for some remarks.
Thank you very much, John. Before we get into news here, I'd like to say something acknowledging the heroism and also the suffering that is going on in Ukraine. We have many Ukrainian immigrants in our state. Every district has some. We also have a number of people, especially in farm countries, whose ancestors came from that part of the world. I don't think anyone here is afraid to take a side. We're on the side of the Ukrainians. And you see a tremendous amount of concern in our caucuses for what's going on. And in fact, if you were watching the budget debate this weekend, you saw Representative Kelly Chambers speak a foreign language. I didn't know that was coming. She learned a Ukrainian greeting. And that's how she wanted to kick off her introduction of an important budget amendment. Over the weekend, you saw 2 long debates and important debates having to do with the operating budget and also the transportation budget in the House. You can tell we are not happy with the operating budget. Representative Stokesbury pointed out that it is somewhere around 10 times, 1,000% larger than any off-year budget adjustment in history. And even with all that, had very little, if anything, in the way of tax relief for the people who sent those dollars to us in the first place. And we will hand it off to Representative Chris Corey, who was part of the floor team that designed that debate. Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, thank you, Representative Wilcox. Just to add a couple comments on the budget debate this weekend, not a single real substantial tax relief proposal was accepted by the Democrats. We asked for a variety of them, trying to find some way to compromise and get money back into the hands of the people of Washington State. One of the first ones and most important was a 0.5% sales tax cut on the state sales tax revenue collections. That would put real money back into people's pockets immediately, and that was turned down. It was interesting debate Saturday because one of the arguments that we are constantly hearing in Olympia is that Washington is the most regressive state when it comes to taxes. And so here we had a way to immediately go after that and help arguably the more middle and lower income people than ever before, and it was turned down. We actually had a great amendment to transfer $1 billion back from an account created that took money out of the budget stabilization account and put it back in there. We know that we've got dark clouds on our horizon, and even our state treasurer was urging us to shore up our reserves and make sure we were putting money back in there, and that was rejected as well. The Democrats' argument being that we wanted to be able to immediately spend that money easier in the event of emergency. Unfortunately, that account it's in right now doesn't even need to be an emergency. It can be spent for whatever. And the people of Washington are rightly asking us to make sure we have proper reserves set aside there. One last piece I'll mention to kick us off. I think I was offering an amendment to add some additional oversight in terms of emergency powers. We have a unanticipated revenue group, and we wanted to expand that to include overview of statutes and some prohibition of activities, rulemaking in the executive branch, and that was ruled out of scope by the majority party. So we continue to try to push for what we believe are good solutions for Washington families and for good governance in this state, and keep hitting some roadblocks, but we're going to keep fighting for them.
Senator Braun.
Well, thank you. I just highlight a couple things. That we had the same debate only on Friday on the transportation operating budget, and a couple things I would highlight. Largely the same outcome. No willingness at all to consider tax relief, even with $15 billion surplus, and this claim that we can't do tax relief because we don't want to do anything that's ongoing is belied by the fact that they spent over $5 billion in new ongoing spending in this budget. So we absolutely could have done tax relief. And two amendments I would highlight. One is along the lines of tax relief. We offered an amendment that would rebate the gas tax for a year. This is an important amendment to folks who are struggling to pay the bills here in Washington State. We have a very high and rising price for gas across our state. And frankly, given world events, that's likely to get worse in the next year. And then on top of that, of course, we know starting in 2023, we have significant increases from the cap and trade system and from the low carbon fuel standard. So the right time to do a gas tax rebate, and not just for 3 days, but for a whole year to help families survive the next year. And we could afford to do it. That was rejected along party lines. The other one I would highlight is an effort to fund law enforcement officers around our state. We know for years, Washington has been the lowest per capita in the number of law enforcement officers, well below the national average. It's gotten even worse in the last 2 years due to the effects of COVID and other things in our society. And we're having trouble getting law enforcement. And part of that, especially in communities, rural communities around the state, is funding. And this would have pushed about $250 million out to communities across the state to hire additional law enforcement members to make sure our community is safe. That again was rejected along party lines. And then one I'll highlight that was accepted is Senator Chris Gildon offered an amendment to put $20 million into the budget to in preparation for potential refugees from the Ukraine. We know the initial estimates are as many as 1 million refugees could be on their way to Poland and surrounding countries. We expect some of those are going to make their way to the U.S. and as is our, frankly, bipartisan history. We wanted to make sure we're prepared to receive and those refugees should that occur. And I will stop there because I know we have folks who want to ask questions, and I look forward to that. Thanks, Mike.
All right, with that, we will go to Rachel LaCourte of the Associated Press.
Hi, good morning. Back to the amendments that your caucuses offered as it relates to helping potential refugees from Ukraine who may end up in Washington. Are there additional steps that you believe the state should take in response to the ongoing war? For example, Colorado's governor has banned state agencies from doing business with Russian state-owned firms and their subcontractors. So I'm curious if you think there are similar actions that should occur here.
I'm not opposed to that where they make sense. Certainly, as JT said earlier, we're on the side of the Ukraine and this war. This is wrong, and we should be on their side, and we should oppose Russia's aggression where we can. But let's be clear, this is really the purview of the federal government. This is not the proper role of state government. So if there's places we can help, certainly I'm happy to support that. I think our more logical role is trying to make space for folks who are refugees or immigrating because of the war. That makes more sense for the states, in my opinion, but happy to help wherever we can.
We had a leadership discussion online about that over this weekend. And if there are ways that the state of Washington can assist in the divestment from Russian assets, then I think our caucus would like to do that, and we're working on a bill.
Are there particular concerns you have about potential Russian cyber attacks? I know that that's been expressed as a concern both at the federal level and state levels, and obviously we've had concerns here about cybersecurity previously.
Yeah, I think we should be concerned, and there was some news reports about a major impact to expediters down at the Port of Seattle. So everyone should be concerned. I know I've stepped up all of my personal cybersecurity efforts, and I think that's an ongoing challenge for business all over our state and country.
Same.
Great. Rachel, did you have any follow-up?
I guess the other question I would ask is, I saw over the weekend the House is changing its protocol, similar to the Senate, in that they're allowing public to start coming back to the galleries on, I guess, tomorrow, and then also dropping the vaccination requirement for lawmakers to be on the floor. Can I just get your reaction to that in the Representative Wilcox?
Glad that it's happening. I would have liked to have done these things earlier, and I would encourage further acceleration.
All right, next we will go to Joe O'Sullivan of the Seattle Times.
Hi, since it's committee cutoff day here for appropriations and Ways and Means, I'm curious what bills in those committees are drawing your attention today, and just what's on your mind as you look through this cutoff day here.
Yeah, I can hop on the House side. I mean, I've got multiple pages that we're going to be dealing with today. I think one of the most concerning ones that we've spent a lot of time discussing is a prejudgment interest bill that will significantly increase costs for a variety of potential, state agencies and other nonprofits and public areas with little benefit to Washington state taxpayers. So we're going to have continual conversations on that. A couple other ones. There's a voting rights bill that's coming through appropriations that we think has some potential flaws in it. So we're hoping to improve on that and make it a little less partisan. Those are just a couple of ones that I see.
Yeah, I would highlight the 1868, the nurse staffing ratio bill. This is a bad idea. It's only in place in one state in the country, that's California, and they have the worst nursing shortage in the country. And they also have care ratings that are lower than Washington. It's a real problem. Nurse shortages is a real problem in our hospitals, but this is going to do nothing to solve it. In fact, likely makes it worse. We should be focused on building out our education system to train and license more nurses, not handicap the hospitals as they try to make this work in the near term. So we're going to be focused on that. There's a few growth management bills that really do little but add cost to housing. That's absolutely the wrong answer. Right now, we're 250,000 houses short of where we need to be. Making them more expensive is not going to fix that problem, and that should be one of our top problems. And then there's a few other higher ed bills where we, because we have so much money and the majority doesn't seem to be willing to send it back in the form of tax cuts. They want to spend a bunch of, literally hundreds of millions of dollars on additional help for higher ed when we are already one of the top 2 or 3 in the country. We're spending $1 billion a biennium, not counting deferred tuition, on higher ed, and we want to pour more money in there instead of giving the average working family a tax break. That seems like misguided effort to me.
And do you have a follow-up, Joe?
Yeah, at this point, as Democrats begin to negotiate the budgets in conference committee, I'm just curious what, if any, input or communication you guys are having, and if there's anything you're sort of seeking to see come out of that process, knowing that you don't like the product anyway, more or less.
Joe, I think there's 2 things that are happening in budgets. First of all, the idea that we have these immense increases in revenues available, and the Democrats can't, find a way to return some of that to the taxpayers, has caught on with the public. I've heard quite a few news and radio shows in the last week or so that are, and these are not conservatives. These are middle of the road, talk show hosts, for example, that just cannot believe the things that come out of the Democratic caucuses that say we don't have enough money to do the things that we want when there's almost 10 times as much to spend in a supplemental budget as there's ever been. So that's on the operating budget side. On the transportation side, I think it's a good thing that they gave up their idea of creating retaliation by taxing people in other states. But to fix that, they also took away really important dollars that are used to build public infrastructure. And that ends up being a major net decrease in the amount of work that's available for construction employees and unions, as well as contractors. So I think that budget has a major problem right now, and they need to figure out how to resolve that. We've got a pretty good solution that we'd offer, and maybe that'll happen.
Yeah, I would just say to the idea that we are involved in the budget process. I can't speak for the House, but the Senate had nearly over a decade of bipartisan budgets out of the Senate up until and through 2017, and then since 2017, it's been pretty much a straight partisan process, unfortunately. So we don't expect to get much input into the budget negotiation.
All right, next we will go to Austin Jenkins of Northwest News Network.
Thank you. On the speaking about policy bills for a moment, there are several gun-related measures that were in consideration, including bans on open carry and even concealed carry in some new settings. And then I see that the House Gallery will also ban concealed carry. Any thoughts on the status of that particular legislation, or what I think is a new rule for the House Galleries to not allow any weapons concealed or otherwise?
Well, you see Republicans, believing very strongly that we need to stand up for the Second Amendment and the even more powerful protections in the Washington State Constitution. And, I've been here starting 12 years now, and I have become convinced that the people on the anti-Second Amendment side generally aren't looking for a reasonable solution. They're looking to piece by piece dismantle the protections of the Second Amendment. And so it's important that we resist those things and stand up for people's right to protect themselves, their family, and even their property. Every single day, I think in our society, we see more instances where people, are finding incentives to have the ability to defend themselves. The idea that peaceful, law-abiding people can't carry their own protection anywhere in our capital, I think is a mistake, and I didn't agree to that.
And just by way of a quick follow-up, there appear to be both permitted and unpermitted events scheduled this weekend at the Capitol, including potentially some sort of truckers event, maybe blockade, not sure. What are you hearing? What are you anticipating? Any thoughts about the potential for something like we saw in Canada happening here at the Capitol in Washington?
I haven't heard any specifics, Austin, but I'll tell you, Washington had one of the first trucker convoys about 2 years ago. I believe it was 2019, when a lot of our logging industry showed up to talk about their concerns on a bill. And I think people have a right to peaceably assemble to petition their government. And hopefully we can have good constructive dialogue if they have concerns over what we're doing here in the state.
All right, next we will go to Hannah Scott.
Hi, good morning, everybody. I wanted to follow up a little bit on some of the budget items. I spoke to Senator Christine Rolfus last week about the tax and fee reliefs that the Senate Democrats were offering about free fares and days at parks and things, and asked why not some broader tax relief. And she said to me that we were living in uncertain times with inflation, and that it was important to put everything in reserves and that they had left, and not do anything ongoing, as you've mentioned. I wondered if you could speak specifically to those uncertain times comments.
Well, I can't disagree that we are in uncertain times. That I think is manifestly true. It's been true for some time. But the idea that we can't therefore provide some tax relief to the people of the state of Washington, I don't think that, I personally don't think that follows logically. When we can afford to spend, billions of dollars in ongoing new government spending, just tells you that that we're not entirely cowed by uncertain times. We're willing to spend money that way. Why wouldn't we be willing to spend money by giving some back to the people of the state of Washington? I think it's a fundamental belief by the majority that they know better how to spend that money than the average Washingtonian, and I just fundamentally disagree with that. And that's where it's at. I mean, if you were to give the average Washingtonian money, would they choose to go to fair or to go have free parking in our state parks? I mean, I'm not opposed to either one of those. I like both those things, but I think that individual, citizens in our state should have the right to decide what they're going to spend the money on, rather than having the Democratic majority say, this is how we think you should spend this extra money. That just doesn't make sense to me.
Well, and I will say that those of us that collect an assured paycheck from the state of Washington and are fortunate enough to collect benefits probably don't have the same perspective as those who work in the private economy and have to deal with all of the uncertainty that we have in the private economy right now. And those are the people that we should be thinking about when we're talking about how do we deal with uncertainty. I would think it would be allowing people to maintain possession of their own resources rather than prioritizing how much tax revenue the government gets.
And I'd like to jump in on that a little bit. I'm looking at a chart that was put together by our staff. From 2013, our budget has risen 114.2%. State spending, 114.2%. The average wage, median private sector wage in the state has only grown 39% over that same time period. So we're asking more from our folks as far as fees, taxes, that type of thing, for a bloated budget than they are making the increase. So it's just, people are paying attention to what we're asking from them as far as spending. And yes, I agreed on the free fares and free passes, but those are just minuscule compared to what the rest of the budget is doing to our folks.
Yeah, and I would add, what we're talking about is not drastic budget cuts. We're talking about putting money back in a savings account for rainy days. We talk a lot here about what happened during the Great Recession, and we're essentially barreling towards having to do this all over again. We're propping up and setting up all sorts of new programs. We don't have the long-term fiscal resources to pay for it if there's a recession. And like I said on the House floor Saturday night, we need to make smart decisions now so we don't have to make drastic cuts down the road. And that, in all likelihood, if there is an economic downturn, is exactly what we're going to be doing. So our message here is, instead of putting ourselves in a position where we have to do these drastic cuts, let's right-size the budget now so that when there is an economic downturn, we're able to weather it. We're not going to have to cut programs and services as needed as dramatically, I would say. And I think that's smart fiscal policy for the state.
And did you have a follow-up, Hannah?
I did. The governor has called a press conference for 1 this afternoon where he's going to speak a little about the CDC mask guidance changing. I know there's been some issues, some lawmakers not on this call, Republicans over in northeastern part of the state, concerned about L&I kind of punishments that are still ongoing. I wondered if anyone can speak to what you would like to hear from the governor today.
Well,
Go ahead.
Go ahead, John.
I like to hear that we're gonna acknowledge the change in guidance from the CDC and move off this very punitive mask mandate here. And we've learned that it's no longer necessary to keep our communities safe. And not only we slow, I think the last in the nation, to peel it back, but we're using our L&I enforcers to drive small businesses out of business as on top of that. So I think it's wrong-headed. It's not keeping people safe. It's not trusting people, and it's not listening to the most recent guidance from the CDC.
Yeah, the stress that is building up in school districts is so destructive. It may be one of the longest term impacts that we see from COVID. We've already lost big parts of 2 years. Schools in many areas are enmeshed in controversy now. School directors are trying to do their job and exert local control, and they're feeling heavy pressure from the Department of L&I. I think the most positive thing the governor could do right now is end all that by allowing people in Washington to make their own choice about masks.
All right, the last question comes via email from Drew Mickelson of King 5 TV. And that is, I know Republicans have been calling for tax breaks in the supplemental budget. Senate Democrats have proposed eliminating the B&O tax for the state's smallest businesses. Is that significant? Does more need to be done with tax relief?
So we have all supported the reduction on B&O on small businesses. It is a good move to help some of our small businesses in particular. Many of them, struggled mightily during the last 2 years of the pandemic. That said, this should not be confused with real tax relief for average Washingtonians. This provides some limited relief, important relief, to a small set of of businesses around our state. But this is not the type of thing you'd see if you did, as we proposed, significant a rebate for gas tax over the next year, or as the House proposed, reduce the sales tax. These are real tax relief that affect real Washingtonians across our state. What's been done in the small business B&O relief is good, but not nearly as substantial as we ought to be doing.
Well, and I'd also say that we've seen a handful of bills dropped late in the session, especially by Senate Democrats. And these are performances unless you include them in the budget. And we've even seen senior Democrats drop these, but unless it goes in the budget, it's not very significant for anybody. So I would take these things seriously. And by the way, we've supported these as well from the minority, but I would take these things seriously when they get incorporated into the majority budgets.
All right, would the leaders like to provide any closing remarks?
I'll defer, John, go ahead.
I'll just say we're down to about a week and a half. It's going to be an exciting week and a half. We got cut off today in Ways and Means and the probes on the other side, and we're hoping to shape what comes out of there, of course. But as we do that, we're going to be focused on the same things we've been focused on since day one, which is public safety. What are we doing to make our communities safer around the state? Affordability. How are we making Washington more affordable when we're facing a 40-year high in inflation nationally, and Washington is higher than the national average? Every bill we vote on, we ought to be looking at through the lens of affordability and what's this doing to working families, and stop, as JT says, stop thinking about it from our perspective and try to think about it from their perspective. That's important. And then finally, what can we get done in the last week and a half that really helps rebuild public trust in state and local government? And I think there's still time to do that, but it doesn't look good based on what the majority has in front of us right now. So that's what we're going to be focused on. And we're going to do our best to represent the people that we represent from around the state. Thank you for being here.
Rep. Wilcox, did you have anything?
I'll see y'all later. Good talking.
All right. Okay. Well, thank you, everyone. Please be on the lookout for an email from Kim Wirtz on when we will have our next Republican media availability next week, the last week of the 2022 legislative session. Thank you.
Thank you.